You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. These were the words of Fred Hampton, who was a 21-year-old leader, a visionary, and a revolutionary. A man whose voice shook the foundations of American power, so much so that the United States government decided he had to die. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a hidden part of history. History, as we know, is written by the victors. In this video, we are going to expose the truth that has been rephrased to some fiction that's nothing close to the truth. Imagine a quiet apartment in Chicago. The clock reads 4:45 a.m. Shadows move outside the window. Inside, Fred Hampton sleeps next to his pregnant fiancée, Deborah Johnson. The air is heavy, silent, until bam! The door crashes open. Gunfire erupts. Bullets fly all around the room like oxygen, walls shatter, and furniture splinters, and over 100 bullets were fired. The Panthers inside barely have time to react. It's not a raid, it's execution. In the chaos, Fred Hampton never even wakes up. He was drugged the night before the incident, leaving him unconscious. Yes, drugged. By whom, you may wonder? An FBI informant. 2 officers stood over his unconscious body. One checks his pulse and says, "He's still alive." The other officer raises his gun, releases another bullet, and utters, "He's good and dead now." That's exactly what happened on a fateful day. Here's the question: why would the United States government, one of the most powerful entities in the world, be afraid of a 21-year-old black man from Chicago? What made Fred Hampton such a big threat that he had to be eliminated? Was it because he was violent? Was it because he was leading riots? Not. Fred Hampton's real crime was that he was doing something far more dangerous in the eyes of the U.S. government. He was uniting black people together. Think about this. What if black people, white people, Latinos, and poor people of all backgrounds suddenly stopped fighting each other and started fighting together against the system that is keeping them down? That's exactly what Fred Hampton was doing. We're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism. We're going to fight capitalism with socialism. He spoke of real change, not just for black people, but for all oppressed people. He organized free breakfast programs for children while the government let them starve. He created free health clinics while hospitals refused to serve the poor. He formed the Rainbow Coalition. It was a multiracial movement of Black Panthers, white Appalachian activists, Latino street groups, and anyone who was willing to stand against oppression. And that's what made him a threat. The government was not afraid of black men with guns, rather they were afraid of black men with power. Black men who could think, organize, educate, and unite. Let's be clear, this was not just a police raid gone wrong type of situation. This was a state-sanctioned murder. The FBI, the Chicago Police Department, and the United States government conspired to silence Fred Hampton forever. In this video, we are going to show how the FBI spied on and infiltrated the Black Panther Party, how a paid informant drugged Fred Hampton the night before the raid, how the government used the media to cover up the truth, and most importantly, how this same system is still in place today. So before we move forward, ask yourself this: what kind of leader does America fear today? And what are they willing to do to stop them? Let's begin. Fred Hampton was a young, charismatic leader who had the power to unite the oppressed across racial lines, shake the foundations of systemic oppression, and lead a revolution that threatened the status quo of America. But on December 4, 1969, the U.S. government made sure Fred Hampton would never see another sunrise. Fred Hampton was more than just a leader. He was more than just an activist. He was a force so powerful, so electrifying, that in just 21 short years, he became one of the most dangerous men in America. But not because he carried a gun, not because he called for violence, but because he was uniting people of diverse races, poor and working class, all under a common cause: revolution. And that's why the United States government needed him dead. To further grasp how a young man from the streets of Chicago became an enemy of the state, we have to go back to where it all began. Fred Hampton was born in 1948 in a segregated world that saw black people as second-class citizens, a world where Jim Crow laws still reigned, where lynchings were still prevalent, and where a black child's future was predetermined before they even learned how to walk. His parents were hard-working people from Louisiana, part of the great migration of black families escaping the South's violent racism, only to find a different kind of racism in the North. Fred grew up in Maywood, Illinois, just outside Chicago, a neighborhood where black families lived under the constant watch of an oppressive system. Even as a child, Fred stood out from his peers, not just because he was smart, but he was brilliant, excelling in school and athletics. Not just because he was a leader, though his classmates already gravitated toward him, but because even at a young age, Fred Hampton had a deep sense of justice. He saw the way black kids were treated differently in school. He saw how the police harassed and brutalized his community. And he knew, even then, that something had to change. Growing up, he was heavily influenced by two of the most powerful voices of black liberation in America, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. He meticulously studied their words, he understood their strategies, and he saw something that many others overlooked. These two men, despite their different approaches, were fighting the same war. The war against white supremacy, the war against oppression, the war against a system designed to keep black people powerless. But Fred Hampton also saw their fates. Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. And that only intensified his fire. If the government was willing to kill those who spoke the truth, then the truth must be dangerous. By 1968, Fred Hampton had fully stepped into the fight. He joined the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party, and within months, he had done something no one expected. He rose to the top, not because he was the loudest or the most violent, but because he was the most brilliant strategist and organizer the Panthers had ever seen. Fred understood that revolution was not just about guns and slogans. A revolution was about building something real for the people. So, under his leadership, the Chicago Black Panthers launched some of the most effective community programs in the country. The free breakfast program, where they fed thousands of hungry children every single morning, free medical clinics that provided health care to those who couldn't afford it, and political education classes that taught black people their rights, their power, and their history. And that terrified the U.S. government, because they knew that when people are educated, when they are fed, when they are taken care of, they become impossible to control. They become revolutionary. And Fred Hampton wasn't just building a movement, he was building an army of conscious minds. Fred Hampton's ability to bring others into the fight made him truly dangerous. Fred Hampton saw something that the U.S. government feared most. Race was a tool used to divide poor and oppressed people. And if those people ever realized they had a common enemy, the system itself, the system would fall. So, he did something that had never been done before. He created the Rainbow Coalition. Not just Black Panthers, but the Young Lords, a Puerto Rican revolutionary group. The Young Patriots were poor white Southerners who had migrated to Chicago and were struggling under the same system. Street gangs, activists, and radicals of all races came together under one umbrella in pursuit of a single goal: to take down the oppressive system that was keeping them all in chains. The U.S. government had always been afraid of black resistance, but they had never faced a leader who could unite all races against them. That's when J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI made their decision. Fred Hampton had to be eliminated. You can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail the revolution. You can run a freedom fighter out of the country, but you can't run freedom out of the country. And you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. Fred Hampton's voice was powerful, too powerful. And just like they did with Malcolm X, just like they did with Martin Luther King Jr., the United States government made sure Fred Hampton would never wake up on December 4, 1969. Fred Hampton lived for the people. He died for the people. And yet his words, his ideas, his revolution, they still live on. While the government succeeded in killing the man, they could never kill the movement. And today, more than ever, we must remember who Fred Hampton was. Because his story is not just history, it is a lesson of how power operates, a lesson in how revolutionaries are silenced, and a lesson in why we must never stop fighting for the truth. It's surprising, but what if I told you the United States government launched an illegal war against its citizens? Not just any citizens, but black leaders of the time, men and women who dared to organize, educate, and fight back against systemic oppression. They weren't killed by criminals, they weren't taken down by rival groups, but they were hunted down by the FBI, which ought to protect them. This was COINTELPRO, the most dangerous government operation you were ever supposed to know about. And Fred Hampton, he was at the top of the hit list. Let's talk about COINTELPRO to fully understand why Fred Hampton was assassinated. COINTELPRO, or Counterintelligence Program, was a covert FBI operation that was designed to infiltrate, sabotage, and destroy any group that challenged the American power structure. And at the center of it all was one man, J. Edgar Hoover, FBI director from 1924 to 1972. J. Edgar Hoover wasn't just the director of the FBI, he was the architect of America's war on black liberation. Under Hoover's orders, COINTELPRO went far beyond mere surveillance. It used deception, psychological warfare, and outright violence to eliminate black leaders. In a 1967 memo, Hoover wrote that the FBI must do everything possible to prevent the rise of a black messiah. Let me say that again. The FBI feared the emergence of a black leader so powerful that they could unite the people and lead them to true liberation. And so, the U.S. government made a decision. Every black leader had to be neutralized. Malcolm X was targeted, surveilled, and later assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. was spied on, harassed, and later murdered. Fred Hampton, he was next in line. Unlike Malcolm and Martin, Fred wasn't just leading the black movement. He was uniting all oppressed people of different races and social classes into one revolution. The U.S. government perceived this revolution as dangerous and a threat to their system. That made him the greatest threat of all, even greater than Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Hoover labeled the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States. Not because they were criminals or violent, but because they were feeding hungry children. Yes, that's right. They were doing what the government refused to do, helping their people. And that's why the FBI had to shut them down. The FBI didn't just target Fred Hampton. They waged a full-scale psychological war on the Black Panther Party. They did it in 3 ways. The FBI infiltrated the group by planting informants and spies inside the Black Panthers. People pretended to be loyal members but were feeding information back to the government. One of the worst cases was William O'Neill. He wasn't just any informant. He was Fred Hampton's bodyguard. O'Neill gave the FBI the blueprint of Fred's apartment. And the night before the raid, he drugged Fred's drink so he wouldn't wake up when the police stormed in. That's not just infiltration. That's premeditated murder. Secondly, the FBI knew that sometimes you don't have to kill a movement, you just have to divide it with psychological warfare and spreading misinformation. So they sent fake letters to Black Panther leaders. These letters were designed to cause mistrust, jealousy, and internal conflict among the group. They wrote fake death threats. They spread rumors that leaders were FBI informants, which led to deadly confrontations between the Panthers themselves. It was a classic divide-and-conquer strategy, and it worked. Another strategy that was employed was the use of the media. The FBI controlled the media. They gave false stories to newspapers, painting the Panthers as violent extremists and criminals. They called them black extremists. They called them domestic terrorists. Does that sound familiar? It should ring a bell, because these same tactics are still being used today. The media has always been the government's greatest weapon, and for the Black Panthers, they were the first victims of modern media propaganda. Beyond being a leader, Fred Hampton was a threat to the system, because he was doing what Malcolm and Martin had yet to do. He brought street gangs together, revolutionaries and working-class people, to fight against the real enemy, the government that kept them all oppressed. And that's when COINTELPRO made its move. The FBI didn't just want Fred Hampton arrested, they wanted him dead. And they orchestrated the entire thing. They used an informant to locate Fred's apartment, drugged him so he wouldn't fight back, barged into his home at 4:45 a.m., and executed him in his deep sleep. After the assassination, the FBI and police tried to cover their tracks. They claimed the Panthers started the shootout. They claimed it was self-defense, but the evidence tells a different story. About 100 bullets were fired. Only one bullet came from the Panthers' gun. This wasn't a shootout. This was a government-sanctioned assassination. And Fred Hampton's blood was on the hands of the FBI. COINTELPRO did not end with Fred Hampton. The government still uses these strategies today. Surveillance, infiltration, psychological warfare. They are still afraid of unity because they know a united people cannot be controlled, nor can they be defeated. And that is why Fred Hampton had to die, because he wasn't just building a movement, he was building a revolution. Fred Hampton's legacy lives on, but the war is not over. Betrayal. It has always been the deadliest weapon in war. And make no mistake, the US government was at war with black liberation. But they didn't fight with guns and bombs. They fought with spies, lies, and psychological warfare. They didn't just kill Fred Hampton. They tried to stop the movement. As if infiltrating his movement wasn't enough, they turned his people against him, and they used a traitor, a man Fred trusted with his life, to set him up for assassination. This is how the FBI's web of deception destroyed the Black Panther Party from the inside. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, had one agenda in mind: to shatter the Black Panther Party before it became too powerful. And to do that, he needed to get in among them. COINTELPRO wasn't just about spying, it was about poisoning movements from the inside. Because Hoover knew the truth. A revolution can't be stopped from the outside. It has to be destroyed from within, and that's exactly what the FBI did. The FBI planted informants inside the Panthers, people who pretended to be loyal, who marched, chanted, and carried guns alongside revolutionaries. But what happened behind the scenes? They were feeding classified information back to the government. They weren't Panthers, they were traitors. William O'Neill was just 20 years old when he became an FBI informant. How did the FBI recruit him? They caught him stealing cars, and instead of locking him up, they made him a deal: work for us or go to prison. And O'Neill took the deal, and just like that, he became the government's inside man. O'Neill didn't just spy on the Panthers. He climbed the ranks, gaining Fred Hampton's trust. He became Hampton's bodyguard. He had access to top meetings, security plans, and most importantly, Fred's apartments. All while secretly meeting with FBI agents, feeding them information about what has been happening among the group. But he wasn't just a spy, he was a saboteur. His job wasn't just to spy on the Panthers, it was to destroy them from the inside. The FBI knew that to break the Panthers, they had to turn them against each other. So they started sending fake letters. They wrote letters pretending to be one Panther leader, threatening another. They spread false rumors that members were FBI informants. They spurred up jealousy, paranoia, and betrayal among them. Brothers turned against brothers. Panthers stopped trusting each other, and the movement started to crack. Fred Hampton wasn't just leading the Panthers. He was uniting Chicago's street gangs into a revolutionary force. This move terrified the FBI, so they sent a fake letter to the leader of the Blackstone Rangers, which was a powerful gang in Chicago at the time. The letter claimed Fred Hampton was plotting to kill him. It was a complete lie, but the goal was clear: start a war. Get the Panthers and the gangs to kill each other off so the government wouldn't have to do it themselves. This was strategic psychological warfare at its peak, and it was working. William O'Neill's final mission was his deadliest. On December 3, 1969, O'Neill cooked dinner for Fred Hampton and the other Panthers. What they didn't know was that O'Neill had drugged Fred's drink. That night, Fred fell into a deep, drug-induced sleep. A powerful sedative was slipped into Hampton's dinner so that he wouldn't be able to fight. He wouldn't be able to defend himself. He slept so deep that when the FBI stormed his apartment hours later, he never woke up. At 4:45 a.m. on December 4, 1969, the Chicago police and FBI launched a military-style raid on Fred Hampton's apartment, where they fired about 100 bullets. Fred Hampton was shot twice in the head while he lay in bed. He was murdered in his sleep, and William O'Neill helped make it happen. Fred Hampton didn't just end up dead. He was targeted. He was watched. He was betrayed by someone he trusted. In the early hours of December 4th, 1969, he was executed in his bed. After Fred's assassination, the FBI and Chicago police lied to the public. They gave a false narrative, claiming there was a violent shootout. They said the Panthers attacked first, but the bullet holes told the truth. This wasn't a shootout, but an execution. William O'Neill lived with that guilt for the rest of his life. Years later, in an interview, O'Neill tried to justify himself. He claimed he was just doing his job. He further added that he was caught between two worlds. But the truth, he was a blatant traitor. And in 1990, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day of all days, William O'Neill committed suicide by running into oncoming traffic. Some say it was an accident, while others say it was his final attempt to escape the weight of his betrayal. COINTELPRO wasn't just some tales of history, it was a blueprint. A blueprint that the government still uses today. The FBI destroyed black movements before, and they'll do it again if we refuse to stand up for the truth and for what is right. Because as long as black people dare to organize, as long as we dare to fight back, they will always try to turn us against each other. December 4th, 1969. It was still dark outside. The city of Chicago was asleep. But inside a modest apartment on 2337 West Monroe Street, the most chilling act of government-sanctioned murder was about to unfold. The Chicago Police Department, backed by the FBI, was on a mission to eliminate Fred Hampton. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was planned down to the smallest detail. The FBI had an inside man, William O'Neill. At 4:45 a.m., 14 heavily armed officers from the Chicago Police Department's tactical unit surrounded the building. These weren't just local cops, they were working under orders from the FBI's COINTELPRO. Inside the apartment, 7 Black Panther members were asleep, including Fred Hampton and his pregnant fiancée, Deborah Johnson. Then, without warning, the first gunshot rang, and following it was an explosion of gunfire. Bullets from the police guns caused windows to shatter, walls to splinter, and ripple through furniture, doors, and flesh. It was a war zone. Surprisingly, out of all the 100 bullets, only one came from the Panthers, and it wasn't even aimed at an officer. The truth about the whole situation is that the Panthers never even had a chance to fight back. The first victim of the raid was Mark Clark. He was on security duty that night, sitting near the front door when a police bullet tore through his chest, killing him instantly. His body slumped over. The shotgun in his lap discharged reflexively, firing into the ceiling. That was the only shot fired by the Panthers. Everything else was pure execution. As bullets shredded the apartment, Fred Hampton never even moved. He was completely unconscious from the drug William O'Neill had given him. Deborah Johnson later described the moment in chilling detail. In her words, "I shook Fred. He didn't wake up. I kept shaking him, but he wouldn't wake up." Bullets kept flying. Other Panthers screamed as they were shot, beaten, and dragged from the rooms. The officers stormed through the apartment, their weapons raised until they reached Fred Hampton's bedroom, and then the gunfire suddenly stopped. Because Fred was still alive, but not for long. "He's good and dead now," an officer said as 2 officers approached Hampton's motionless body. One of them, Officer Joe Gorman, looked down at the 21-year-old revolutionary. He was still breathing. That's when the most petrifying moment of the entire night happened. According to some survivors, one of the officers said, "Is he still alive?" Then the other officer raised his gun and pulled the trigger. 2 close-range shots to the head, then came to the final words, "He's good and dead now." As the police began to spread their false narrative, the investigation proved otherwise. The majority of bullet holes were coming into the apartment, not out. Fred Hampton's bed was soaked in blood, but not a single bullet was fired from his room. He never even woke up. This wasn't a shootout. This was a state-sponsored execution. At 21, Fred Hampton was already perceived to be a dangerous young boy and a heavy threat by the U.S. government. His fighting cause made him dangerous and a threat to the government. And that's why on December 4, 1969, they murdered him in his sleep. But here's the thing about revolutions. You can kill the revolutionary, but you can never kill the revolution. And yet, every newspaper ran with the police's version of events. It took weeks for the truth to come out. By then, the damage had been done. After the execution, officers did everything they could to cover up their crimes. They moved evidence. They rearranged Fred Hampton's body to make it look like he had been shooting back. They even went as far as planting weapons in the apartment. But the survivors refused to be silenced. They gave interviews. They showed reporters the real crime scene. Slowly, the truth started breaking through the lies. The assassination of Fred Hampton was a shock to the world. The Black Panther Party didn't just mourn, they fought back. They launched independent investigations. They exposed the FBI's involvement. Most importantly, they refused to let the government erase Hampton's legacy. Years later, FBI documents were declassified. They proved what the Panthers had been saying all along. Fred Hampton's assassination was ordered from the top. The FBI, Chicago police, and Cook County officials all worked together to eliminate him. J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO program wasn't just about spying. It was about killing black leaders before they could transform the world. The morning after Fred Hampton's assassination, newspapers across America echoed the same story. Black Panthers engage in a violent shootout with police. The government wanted the public to believe that Fred Hampton and his comrades were dangerous criminals who got what they deserved. They called it a firefight. They called it self-defense. But what they didn't tell you was that Fred Hampton never fired a single shot. It was one of the most unbelievable acts of deception in American history. Fred Hampton was assassinated in 1969. But the tactics used to kill him never went away. They just got smarter, more subtle, and more covert. Unless we recognize history for what it is, it will keep repeating itself. Just hours after the raid, the Chicago Police Department held a press conference. They claimed they had no choice but to return fire when the Panthers shot at them first. They described a violent, chaotic battle where police barely made it out alive. This was a blatant lie, and the media played along. With so much undeniable proof, you might think that the people responsible for Fred Hampton's death would be brought to justice. And yet, despite all this evidence, no one was ever convicted. Fred Hampton's murder was just one piece of a much larger conspiracy. Not a single FBI agent or police officer ever spent a day in prison. The U.S. justice system protected its criminals. Why? Because this wasn't just about Fred Hampton. It was about power. It was about sending a message. If you rise against the system, we will silence you. For years, the government stalled investigations. They buried evidence, destroyed files, and even lied under oath about their involvement. When the families of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark finally sued the government, it took them 13 years to win a settlement. The government paid out $1.85 million. But no one admitted guilt. No one apologized. Because to them, Fred Hampton's life was just collateral damage. However, COINTELPRO didn't end in the 70s. The government still uses these tactics today. They still control the narrative, demonize black leaders, and silence voices that challenge the system. Fred Hampton's story is not just history, it's a warning that the same forces that killed him are still in power today. If you want to watch more hidden truths about the history of the black, subscribe to this channel